All right, thank you so much for staying with the Monday Report. Let's start that discussion on the junior secondary school transition and the questions you may have. We'll try to answer most of them here. Professor Collins Odote is with me. He's a member of the Education Reform Task Force. Thank you so much for making time.
Thank you, Trevor.
Dr. Emmanuel Manyasa is also here with us, Executive Director of SAWA Agenda. Asante sana for making time.
Okay.
And Kennedy Echesa, lecturer and advocate of the High Court, is joining us from Kakamega. Asante sana for making time, Ken. So let's start off.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So let's start off with some of the feedback that's coming through here. And this is from Cynthia Juma. Cynthia Juma had a very straightforward question to Professor. He's saying that, Trevor, I am a teacher seemingly headed to the junior secondary schools. And let me tell you that we know nothing about this thing called CBC. Ask Odote how one teacher will effectively teach 12 subjects at a go, bearing in mind that we only have 2 subjects per teacher. And also, as a lover of CBC, my only fear is lack of manpower. 14 learning areas against less than 5 teachers. Poor or lack of infrastructure is another letdown. Let the government move with speed to address the gray areas. Otherwise, the pioneer class will find it murky. This is John Ondiek from Ahero, Nyando, who is also a teacher as well. But, Prof, there seems to be a lot of misunderstanding or just gray areas when it comes to the transition to the junior secondary school. In your view, how were the teachers going to address that gap, considering that there are 12 subjects or areas or speciality, and you can only deploy 1 teacher based on the recruitment that's going to come through?
Thank you, Trevor. I wish that my friend, the CEO of the Teacher Service Commission, Nancy Macharia, was here to answer that specific question about the numbers. But I think there are 2 things that I would like to say at the outset. Number one, by its very nature, Trevor, transition is always a teething issue, always. And number 2, the reason why the Working Party was appointed was because of the need to address some of these issues that are problematic. And after our first progress report, you realize one of the things that the ministry was asked to do was to prepare guidelines as to how that transition would happen. Just this afternoon, I was speaking with the Director General of Education and tells me, by the Prof, the guidelines are ready, they're just waiting to be released. So I'm sure in the next few days, everybody will have the detailed guidelines, including who is going to teach what, how is everything going to happen. I can tell you, for example, 2 things. One is, until today, everybody thought, how much are we going to pay for junior secondary school? Government has now said, nobody is going to pay. It's going to be free of charge. Yeah. The second is, just last week, I was in Thika, and they were doing the training of trainers, those going to train the teachers who are going to train this thing. So in terms of the numbers, I am sure, Trevor, that in a few days we will know the actual numbers per school. Because while you're being told that 1 is going to be hired in a school, it is not as if it's only that 1 who is going to teach. In every school, there are going to be people who have the qualifications. The last time we spoke with TSC, there are people who have diploma, there are people who have degrees, who are in those schools, who will be identified. So I don't think that you'll have 1 teacher teaching all the subjects. It's not going to be possible. And even from the comments you read, Cynthia says, 1, I don't know. Yeah. But on the other hand, she says that only 2 teachers will teach. Another caller says just 5 of them. It just shows you the lack of clarity, and I am sure in the next few days there'll be clarity from government. But
what did the task force find out? How many teachers would be required for this transition to be effective? Because we know TAC is looking to employ 36,000. How many do you recommend?
I think the one thing that we found out as a task force is that we required more teachers for us to be able to ensure we have the transition. At that point in time, the debate had to be who was going to teach. Was this going to be primary content or secondary content? Once that was settled, then the issue about the mapping out of the number of teachers that required was going to be done. The second thing that people must note is as we employ 36,000 this year, there's going to be another number being employed next year. So over the next 2-3 years, the numbers will progressively ease. And the thing that we need to appreciate, Trevor, is we are doing this in a situation of economic issues. So we need to balance between what do we sort out immediately, what do we backload in terms of sorting it out.
Yeah. And Dr. Manyasa, we've had this conversation with you for quite a long time, before even the task force was decided, before even the junior secondary school was decided to be domiciled in the primary schools. Yeah. What is your assessment of all the recommendations and the transitions that we are at this particular point?
Thank you, Trevor. I appreciate the effort being made. It's always good to comment where there is positive work happening. But I have to be very honest. We shouldn't be here, because these children didn't start CBC in grade 6. they started in grade 1. And we have been asking for this preparation to happen for years until we got here. Now we are in a position where only today the government is saying we are going to give 15,000 shillings per child. What is the basis? I don't think anyone has done a costing to tell us that the tuition for junior secondary will cost 15,000. So what is the basis? The basis is lacking because we didn't do what we needed to do when we should have done it, which was to prepare a costed implementation plan that says at this level, this much will be needed for this child. So that is a problem that I have, that we seem to just stumble into every stage of CBC implementation when we actually have time. Curriculum reforms are nothing new. They happen all over the world, and there is a curriculum reform cycle that you plan for. You know, we're going to move from here, we will go here, and we will go there. We are talking about the numbers of teachers that are being recruited. We need to understand that 22,000 of them are going to be interns. Interns are hired for a year. That is the definition of the intern teachers. They're hired for a year. Do we want junior secondary to be run by interns? Because this is the most important stage in this system as designed. It is the point at which children are going to explore their talents and start to figure out which career paths and which path they will take beyond junior secondary. So if that is going to be run by interns, meaning you have an intern this year, next year that intern is not there, so you have another intern, and the following year you have another intern, how do we guide these children through the process to identify the pathway they want to take beyond junior secondary? I think that is something we haven't thought through. I wish that these teachers had been recruited in November last year when it was first mentioned that this number of teachers was going to be hired. Yeah. I don't understand why, having made that decision in November last year, we are only recruiting now. So when do we train them? Do we want to take them through a 3-day training? And does that become sufficient to enable these people who are currently saying they know nothing about CBC, as you have read that comment, to be ready to implement? I think that, I don't know whether it's a Kenyan thing or is a government thing. We like to stumble into things that we could actually prepare for well and do well.
Okay. Echesa, are we truly ready for this transition? We are here now. On the 30th, the students are reporting.
Thank you, Trevor. I have said before, and I will repeat, that this transition is a scam, is a bad joke, is a bad idea, and it is sad that we are ruining our children as the nation watches and we come to the screen to say that all is well. Why am I saying that perhaps this transition is one of the biggest scams in the recent history? It is because as a country, we are lacking the capacity to carry out the transition, to implement CBC in the anticipated manner. We require 3 basic things to have any meaningful transition from 844 to CBC. 1 is proper infrastructure. 2, manpower. 3, funding. By infrastructure, Trevor, I mean the Ministry of Education has in itself admitted that every primary school that is going to have junior secondary schools should have 2 extra classrooms away from what they have had before that will be used for home science, 1 for home science, art and craft, and music, and another room for computer. As we speak, the government has not made any effort to even indicate that in the near future, they will do construction of 2 more classes in each of the secondary schools, primary schools that will act as junior secondary schools. Secondly, not all primary schools are going to be junior secondary schools. We have some primary schools that do not qualify because the minister has said you must have the capacity of 45 or more transiting students, which means such primary schools will have their children going to other primary schools. The issue of distance. We have regions in this country where schools are not close to each other, regions like Turkana, regions like Kwale, and many of our hardship areas in this country. Even if the schools are in the neighborhood, we only have one classroom that is free for use. The class that was left by learners transiting from standard 7 to the standard 8 of 844. So if at Mwitoti Primary, the class had a capacity of 50 students, and the incoming grade 7 from the same Mwitoti are more than 50, and you are collapsing a school like Esimuli Primary, which had 38 students, to come and join in Mwitoti, you are going to strain the already strained infrastructure that we have. We do not have functional laboratories in primary schools, and government has said these learners will use the laboratories in the nearby secondary schools. That assumption is wrong and misleading. Not every secondary school back in our village has a laboratory. And the laboratory, Trevor, is not about the building, it's the chemicals and what is required in that laboratory for the effective teaching of the sciences. When you come to manpower, and I want to give a very practical example to Kenyans who are listening. In Mumias East Sub-County, Teacher Service Commission is going to deploy 81 teachers. Of the 81, 58 are interns, as Dr. Manyasa has rightly put. The remaining, already 5, are interns in the present system. So the 18 who are permanent are going to be deployed in 58 centers that have been identified. So only 1/3 of the permanent teachers will be deployed in the centers that are hosting CBC. That is 1 teacher per school in 1/3 of the schools. The rest of the schools will have only 1 intern. And then TSA has indicated that it is going to use trained teachers in secondary schools to come and teach junior secondary. The secondary schools, as we have today, are understaffed.
Yeah.
You can't go and create a crisis where we already have a crisis.
Okay. Prof, I'd like you to respond to Echesa because you've been dealing with this firsthand, especially on the issue around transition. By the time there was a recommendation that when there's 45 in a classroom, then it is merged to the next one. What was the thinking behind that? How practical would it be even to share laboratories like was presented?
Trevor, I've just come from Naivasha.
Yeah.
And in Naivasha, the working party is still working. And like my good friend Echesa, we are dealing with practicals, not theory.
Yeah.
And it's nice to theorize. So let me try and debunk a few things. And let me start with what Manyasa said, then I'll come to... Manyasa says, nobody has done the calculations in terms of the amounts of money required. As at last week on Friday, the working party was looking at draft figures in terms of calculations on Friday. That's for JSS. As at today, we're having conversations around figures for primary and also going to go figures for senior secondary. So it is not true that the figures are not being calculated. They're being calculated to try and look at it, to try and get things. But the second thing, we must recognize that as we're doing the calculations, there's also reality. Reality is that school must go on by end of January. So you need to make a decision that do we first finish the full calculations or do we give figures that are interim to enable, because even before the working party was established, there were figures for primary schools, there were figures for secondary schools. I can tell you, having gone round, everybody was complaining about those figures, and we'll see what it is that comes out, but some decision needed to be made. Echesa is right about the 3 conversations, about infrastructure, about personnel, and I don't remember what the 3rd one is. So let's start with the one he spoke about a lot, personnel. He's spoken about the people who are going to be posted. But Trevor, the people who are going to teach in the schools are not only new teachers. There are 3 categories of people in my mind that are going to teach in the schools. Number 1, you're going to have the new teachers, the 81 that he talks about from Mumias East. But as we speak, there are people in post. There are people in primary schools that have the qualifications to teach secondary, people who have secondary level, people who have degrees in those primary schools. Some will be deployed. 2, there are primary schools, there are secondary schools near, who will then get to then be allocated. So if we only look at the 81 going to be sent there, we miss the entire point. The reality about the fact that he says, yes, secondary schools have been understaffed, that is true. So have been primary schools. But that understaffing has not occurred now because we have grade 6. Remember, there are no new kids that have come. We've just created a new level. The people who are teaching class 6 even last year still exist. So the teachers exist. So the shortfall is a shortfall that I think government must deal with, but it's not a shortfall that's only coming because of JSS. So I think that's something we need to appreciate. Let's go to infrastructure. If you looked at our report, we were clear in our mind that we had a problem concerning infrastructure. If these people had gone to secondary, Trevor, because of 100% transition, the infrastructure challenge in secondary would have been worse. Every year when Form 1s go, they're going to go now in the next 1 week or so. You will see people sleeping in dormitories. I am in a board of management, and every year when new students come, you suffer. So if we'd taken to them grade 6, the infrastructure challenge would have been greater. By taking them to primary, at least in terms of classrooms, we already have the classrooms. What we lack in several places, we lack the question of do they have laboratories. And that's why government has said over the next 1 year, we are going to build. Chester says, but those sub-county schools do not have laboratories. Maybe true. The question is, but where are the Form 1s, Form 2s, and Form 3s doing their practicals? The same place where they're doing their practicals is the same place our kids of grade 6 will do the practicals in the intervening period as these things got sorted out. So for me, I think what we need to ask ourselves, I will admit, as Manya said, that we should not have been here. The reality is that
we are here.
We are here. And that's why, for me, the question is, what do we do to try and solve it? And I think as part of the working party process, as part of the new government, efforts are now being made to try and ensure that this transition, a lot of the teething issues are identified and are resolved.
Yeah, I hear you, but Dr. Manyasa, then what would be the best option? Because it's true what Professor is saying. We shouldn't have been here, but we are here now.
Yeah.
And then on the 30th, the learners are reporting to school. So what do you do?
I think the government should just start listening much more. Because the things we are saying now, we have said them for a few years. And if they were listening, we wouldn't be here. So even now, the things a lot of people are saying should be listened to. We shouldn't be defensive. Why am I saying that we should not be defensive? Even when we look at the numbers that TSC is hiring, a significant number of the permanent teachers are going to replace those who have left teaching by way of retirement, by way of death, by way of resignation, by those who have been fired for other malpractices. So even about the 12,000 permanent teachers that are going to be hired, not all of them are new. A significant number is replacement for teachers who have left the service. And so I think that the challenge we have to confront is this. Going forward, we have to become more systematic. We are not. And we are stumbling into things, waking up on a daily basis and trying to do something, which we have to stop. I have suggested before that CBC is a new thing. We need to have a standing committee that will last until this pioneer class gets out of university, because every new year we will come across a new problem that is being caused by the fact that we are in the learning process of implementing this curriculum. And I think that should happen. If we can't transform the working party into a permanent committee that will oversee the implementation, let us set up the National Education Board is provided for in the law. Why doesn't it exist? It needs to exist so that it can be troubleshooting these challenges that emerge with the implementation. We need to do that. I think that is important. Secondly, I hope that the domiciling of junior secondary in primary school is an interim measure, not a permanent one. And so if it is an interim measure, the permanent solution is to have a junior school, because that is what is envisaged in the basic education framework. If you look at it, it has lower secondary, which is envisaged as a separate school from senior school and from primary, unless we have put down something else and we now want to execute something else. Kenyans did not realize that we were changing the curriculum and changing the system at the same time. I think this is something that needs to be clear to people. I have had comments now, people saying, let us call this upper primary and not junior secondary. Let us go. We are changing the system. And change of the system means we have junior school and we have senior school and we have primary school. So and this is my expectation from the working party as they continue finishing their work, that they will recommend the existence of a junior school.
Yeah.
Where can that junior school be? That junior school can be in the current sub-county schools. They are well spread across the country, and in few places where the schools are far, such that children can't commute, we can set up new schools. I think that permanently trying to domicile junior secondary in primary schools is more costly than taking them to secondary.
But would that mean that the KEPSEA assessment has to be used to place the students?
It doesn't.
How do you then choose which student goes to which extra?
It doesn't have, because the competition for placement is about national, extra-county, and county schools. No one is competing to go to a sub-county school. So if we turn sub-county schools into junior school, then there's no competition. And then we start to expand the capacity of the county, extra-county, and national schools into becoming the senior school, and starting now to reclassify them into those that will be technical, those that will be talent academies, and those that will be regular schools. Because remember, we had 6 years to prepare for junior secondary, and we are here in this crisis. We have only 3 years to prepare for senior. And if we joke, before we know it, we'll be ready for senior.
Yeah.
And senior is even more demanding in terms of preparing for it, because when we call a school technical, it is not just renaming a school and calling it technical. Okay. It is staffing, it is equipping.
Okay. Yeah. Chester, there's quite a number of feedback that's coming through. I'd like to read some of them, but before that, let me hear what your recommendation would be now. Now that we're already here, how do we sort out this issue? Because on the 30th, the learners are going to school.
Very well, Trevor. I have said before, and I will still tell you, that people keep insisting that this train has left the station, is headed. Our train is headed for a very, very tragic accident. And before I make a comment I wanted to make, I want to remind my senior brother, Professor Odote, that CBC requires the teaching of foreign languages. It requires the teaching of technicals like home science. How many teachers of home science or music or business studies or French have even applied to be employed? Again, another example, which is practical, in the entire Mumias East sub-county, Trevor, we only had one teacher of home science, the principal of Shitoto Girls Secondary School. And when she died, the entire sub-county does not have a single teacher of home science. We only have one teacher in Mumias West teaching at Muslim girls. This small girl will be asked to move around about 60 schools in Mumias West, 60 schools in Mumias East. What are we going to teach? The best we can do is to bite the bullet, say we made a problem, rename the so-called grade 7 or junior secondary into class 7. We go to class 8. They can introduce class 9 if we so wish. Then we transit to secondary school. Even if we cheat ourselves that we can rehabilitate this system called CBC, we are only going to ruin our children. Nothing is going to take place from 30th in the so-called junior secondary schools. We must bite the bullet. We must take hard decisions in the best interest of the child. Otherwise, we shall find ourselves in more problems in February than where we are now.
Yeah. Manasa, you want to jump in before?
Yeah, I don't really feel nice about people getting stuck in 844.
Yeah.
Because I was in school when 844 was introduced. There was much less consultation than what has gone into setting up CBC. There was much more confusion than what we see now. The only thing that did not occur was the issue of double intake, double transition, because they were prolonging years in primary school. And to be honest, the CBC is way superior to the current curriculum that we are implementing, which was established to help the overgrown boys in primary school to learn something that they will do when they leave primary school, and which is has been wasteful. I have said this here before. There is evidence that can be tabled here. This year we had KCSE in March, and 46,000 young Kenyans got E, and over 390 of them scored D and below, 390,000. And that has been happening annually, and no one tells us. Those who defend that system don't tell us what happens to those young Kenyans. And so transitioning, we have to transition. Are there challenges? There are. Are some of those challenges our own making? Yes. And that's why I'm arguing that we need to be much more serious going forward and make sure that we do not generate hiccups in the system that could actually be preempted.
Okay. Prof, based on what you've seen, what is going to take place on the 30th when the students go to school?
Trevor, allow me first to respond to Echesa. Then I will talk about what I see on the 30th. Echesa needs to at least start recognizing that Kenya is beyond Mumias East. He keeps on just saying, in Mumias East, where I come from. Echesa, you know, even Asumbi has schools, so we need to think about the entire country. On the issue about whether we should stick to 844 or go to CBC, I think Manyasa has responded to him. I had the privilege of going through this country, and we asked Kenyans and got feedback. 88% of Kenyans told us, please continue with CBC, but make these adjustments. So this conversation about, you know, we should just go back to class 7, class 8, and even class 9, to be honest, is a tired argument.
Okay.
It has been hard. Kenyans have spoken. After the results came out, we sat, when we were presenting this report with His Excellency the President, for around 2 hours, having the debate about what works, what doesn't work. So I would request Echesa, let's deal with the real issues. Let's not get stuck to history, because it will not take us too far. On the 30th, several things will happen. First of all, just the same way when we had the 100% transition, there was a lot of challenges for schools. I think those challenges are going to be there. But I get comfort in a few things. Number one, there's clarity on which classes these kids will go to. At least there's no child, the bulk of them, who will go to a school and not find a class to stay in.
So they'll go to the current class 7.
They go to the current class 7.
Okay.
Unlike the past, where people would go to school and you don't even know where you stay, you don't even know where you sleep. Number two, all these kids will go back home. So accommodation will not be an issue. Number three,
except the ones in boarding schools.
Except the ones in boarding schools. Okay. And the beauty of why government is actually doing assessment of the schools is so that they don't talk about theory in a TV room. They talk about the practicals in the schools. We have gone to this school. These are the facilities that it has. Even the ones that the Chesa was complaining about, where will they go to? People will be posted to a school based on proximity. So you know you are going to school X. Number three, the materials these kids are going to learn, Trevor, is already released for grade 7. So the materials they're going to read is known. So we know the class, we know the learners, and we know the materials. The only thing people are then asking, the teachers.
Okay.
By the 1st of February, which is one day after the 30th, the teachers that require to be posted will have been posted. Okay. So you'll have teachers, you will have learners, you will have materials. Okay. Before then, the process of their training will take place. So at least we're starting from a point where it isn't, and that's why I agree with Manyasa, it isn't the ideal. Okay. But it is not a crisis.
So, Prof, I'll come to you in just a bit for a right of reply. But, Prof, you said let's get practical here. So let's do another practical approach, okay? Right now, the government is assessing 23,000 primary schools. They've assessed 14,000 so far. 13,000 are compliant with what they want. About 1,000 are not. So if the students are going back to the current class 7, what happens to the ones who are supposed to be merged at some point? Will they then be stopped and taken to a different school, or what happens?
Which are the ones that...
the ones that have less than 45 that are supposed to be taken to the school nearby, about 2 kilometers away. But they're reporting on the 30th. We've not been told which school will be merged where. So those ones will go back to their current class 7. Is it that at some point, will they now then be told, okay, fine, you guys are supposed to move from here, go to that next school?
I can only have as a guess. I don't know, because I am no government. But my assumption is that the reason why this assessment is being done now is so that they can then make the decision. You go to school X or you go to school Y. So that by the time schools is opening, you know as a learner, this is where I am going to. That's my assumption.
Okay. All right. Chesa, you wanted a right of reply briefly before I take
Yes,
some
I had
feedback.
that right of reply
Yes.
when Professor said that life is not about Mumias East. And you know, for avoidance of doubt, Mumias East is one of the best performing sub-counties and well equipped. So if it has a problem, it means that 3/4 of Kenya has a problem. Problems facing our education system are common and uniform in this country. Go to Kajiado Central. They only have 2 teachers of music. Go to Kwale County, the entire county, teachers of home science are about 17. And number 2, about getting tired with history. Why should you run away from history when you are going into an uncertain future that is very, very tragic?
Okay.
And Dr. Manyasa, Professor Odote, and Kenneth Chesa here are not going to implement this CBC. If we give it the academic argument, the academic intellectual approach, the government approach, we are losing it.
Okay.
This program has to be implemented by teachers who teach in the villages, teachers who face the problems that we are raising.
Okay.
Otherwise, we can't sit in Naivasha and say we want to implement CBC from a boardroom.
Okay.
Government has not even sent the capitation, the funds to schools ahead of 30th.
All right.
Where will teachers in primary schools equip the laboratories, the libraries, and so forth?
Okay. Prof, there's also another conversation here from Wilson Sosion before I take some of the feedback. Wilson Sosion says the curriculum model for grade 7 is still high-pitched and should be toned down to fewer learning areas and content toned down to enable primary school teachers to deliver the curriculum, short of which we are staring at a disaster. Was this a conversation that was had within the CBC task force, that the content needs to be toned down? I see Manyasa shaking his head. I'll come to you now.
I'm smiling to Honorable Sassion. Thank you very much, Honorable Sassion. One of the terms of reference of the Presidential Working Party is to look at the issue about the summative evaluation of the CBC and to think about the issue about curriculum. Just last week, when the subcommittee presenting on that was giving a preliminary conversation, there are discussions around content. And when we make the final report in March, issues around content is going to be one of the things that I think we are going to discuss. Number 2, the period for actually the review of the curriculum is 5 years. The 5-year cycle is ending. So even from a KICD perspective, the conversation about reviewing not just grade 7, but even grade PP1 to grade 6 is a conversation on the table. The question that I think we need to have dealt with now is, because of the transition matters, you can't have too many balls in the air. So anything about content will be dealt with wholesomely. But I can confirm to you as a member of the Working Party, it is one of the conversations on the table currently as part of the conversations.
Okay. Dr. Manyasa, you don't agree with Socio? I saw you shaking your head earlier on.
I actually agree with Socio on the issue of content.
Okay.
In this era, the role of a school is to teach children how to learn. Because content becomes obsolete so fast. So concentrating on feeding children a lot of content, which will be obsolete by the time they even finish school, is not useful. What is useful is to allow them space to learn how to learn. And I'm unhappy with the quantity of content that has been fed into CBC. I'm not too bothered about it because the review cycle is 5 years, and I'm expecting that when the review cycle commences, that 2 things will be reviewed. 1, the content, the number of learning areas. To me, they are too many, and the parental engagement model. What has been designed so far is ill-informed to me, and that needs to be reviewed. So I am not too worried about those, because those have been, I am sure Prof will confirm, they have received memoranda from stakeholders on this, and I'm expecting that the report will be comprehensive enough to highlight those areas, and KICD will pick them up in the review cycle of the CBC.
Okay. Let me bring up some of the feedback that's coming through. A lot of it is there, but let's read about 7 or 10 of them really quick. The hashtag you're using is the Monday Report at Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Monday Report. Let's see what you're saying. Tony says, in most schools in my location, that's in Kinyanka in Meru County, there are no structures to accommodate the junior secondary school learners. We are still waiting with anxiety to see what happens. Ministry of Education, give us a signal. Okay? Let's see what else you're saying here. Dalo says, CBC thing is a learner-centered approach, emphasize the acquisition of practical skills and competencies. If the kids will continue in the same school setup, Why are the burdens of new sets of uniforms preferred on already poor parents? We'll talk about the uniform issue in just a bit. Let's bring up the other one, Wanoina. Michael says, let the panelists clarify if recruited teachers are well prepared to teach because the teachers specialized in some subjects, but now they are going to teach everything. Like a chemistry teacher will be teaching music. Okay. Let's see what else he's saying. Gibron Abraham says, uncertainty in education sector is not good. Those in leadership should ensure that other stakeholders in the sector are aware of the process. Do we expect same teachers in primary to teach junior secondary school learners? Are the 30,000 new teachers enough to teach junior secondary school learners in 30,000 schools? Okay. Let's see what else you're saying. Lynette Wasonga says, will the learners just walk to school in uniform and get everything, including books, now that the government is paying? When will the learners get the information about the uniforms? Will the teachers share the staff room? Pertinent question there's being raised. And Kadamawi says, why do we still burden parents with uniforms in this day and age? It has no added value to our children's academics, just a financial burden. Okay. John says, will one teacher per classroom be enough to teach all the students, considering that secondary school teachers specialize in specific subjects? How will the gap be closed? I think we'd already addressed part of that conversation. Wanyonyi Morgan says, it's good that the junior secondary students, those in public primary schools, will learn for free. My plea is that the Ministry of Education, together with the national government, should make education free in all levels. Okay? Laura says, ask Professor Collins why they recommended typewriting and shorthand as part of pre-technical studies in a computer era and in the 21st century. You can answer that question before we continue.
I did not make that recommendation. I didn't.
I see you shaking your head.
People should realize that the content of the CBC curriculum was decided over 6 years ago, not by us.
Yeah.
We didn't make a recommendation. If he has an issue with it, we will see when we do the review.
So that was already there?
It was there. We have made no recommendation on content.
Okay. But this is part of what you're saying, that some of the subjects will then have to be reviewed, right? Because it's true that it's not the 21st century necessity.
I wouldn't say whether it is part of the 21st century or not, but at least what I know is in terms of content, we have received many, many submissions of the things that require to be looked at. I think Manyasa has just alluded to even 2 of them. He's alluding to another. So there's quite a lot of stuff that we receive. Okay.
All right, let's continue with the feedback really quick before we come back. And John says the government should decide on a common uniform for all grade 7s across the country and provide for a single pair to every student. We'll talk about this uniform issue in just a bit. It's coming up quite a number of times. And Mbaka says, let them clarify on the number of learning areas and the manpower available. Employing 1 teacher in each school is going to be a big challenge. Okay? Let's see what else you're saying here. Martin Ouma says, I'm a teacher and I specialize in 2 teaching subjects in the university. So how will I handle the other subjects? Okay? Junior secondary school is a system that will transform how learning outcomes are determined in schools and the skills one gets after completing studies. However, I still think, despite the government paying the fees for learners, there will still be exploitation of parents in purchasing uniforms. Let's talk about this uniform issue, then come back and wind up on the feedback, because I know there are quite a number of them. Is this necessary, Dr. Manyasa, and I'll start with you, to ensure that the grade 7s or the junior secondary schools have a different uniform, considering that the current one they were using up to grade 6, which is the current class 6. So ideally, people use the same uniform up to class 8. But now there's grade 7, 8, 9, that then now they have to change uniforms. Is it necessary, or is this a necessary burden to the parents?
I know that there will be very many varied viewpoints on this issue. But first, the children were prepared for a transition. They even selected secondary schools. They went through the process of choosing a land and others. And now we are telling them, you won't move. So there is something that needs to show them that they have actually changed their status from being primary school children to junior secondary. And I think that that is the reason why a new pair of uniform is being required. So for me, from where I sit, I think that that may be necessary to give these children some sense of transition even when they remain in the same school. There has been a lot of discussion around the whole issue of uniform in the first place. But the issue of uniform is both a social issue and a discipline issue in schools. We know in areas where children will leave home, they will carry other pair of clothes and change along the way and disappear in the market and not go to school. So when you tell them now you don't have uniform, and so there is nothing that stops them from loitering everywhere else they want to loiter during class time, it becomes very difficult. It's something that we might maybe do away with in future, but at the moment, I think uniform is still important to help teachers manage the school, but also to blunt the socioeconomic differences that are sometimes so glaring among the children and may have a psychological effect on some children who come from not very well-to-do households.
Yeah.
When we allow every child to come with their Sunday best to school, and for some of them, their Sunday best may not be that very good. So I think there are many issues around that. I don't think that it is an issue that can be canvassed and settled now.
Yeah.
I think for now we'll go with the guidance of the government on what happens.
Yeah.
I'm just worried about the fact that if you have 33,000 schools, that now there will be 33,000 new sets of uniform in the country. And maybe it should just be some modification of the current uniform of the school where they are. Maybe change the top if it is for the boys, and maintain the same pants or something like that.
Not trousers.
Yeah, not so much difference from what they have now.
Okay. Prof, because some parents are arguing that they're still in the same school anyway, so why don't they just continue with the same uniform instead of burdening them with buying new uniforms for junior secondary school?
Trevor, I spoke with those kids.
Yeah.
Each of those kids, number one, wanted to go to another school. Number two, wanted to go far
from their
current schools. We have denied them that opportunity. We must deal with the psychosocial issues. We must deal with the children's psychology. The least we can do. And as they were going to secondary school, those kids expected, they expected their trousers, so we must meet them halfway. I think the least we can do for those kids to show them that they have transited is to let them have uniform. So for me, the issue of uniform, if there's one thing that, as a person, for me, I'm extremely excited about, is that at least, even though these kids will be the same place, there'll be something to show them that actually you've transited to the next level. And that uniform is the least we can do for them, number one. Number two, the question about why can't government provide uniforms for all of them? They could. But Trevor, government is already also providing 9.6 billion.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the things people are complaining about is my kid is going to class 6, I have somebody that's going to Form 1. Will I afford the fees? Government is saying we are doing the fees. All that you're doing is paying for the uniform. The question that Manyasa has asked, but there will be 36,000 uniforms across the entire country, even in primary schools. They are the same kinds of uniforms across the entire country. Every school has their own distinct uniform. What I heard the CS say today, let the boards of management of those schools make a decision about what kind of uniform they would like to have. The boards of management are from those schools. There's nothing that stops a board of management from saying, by the way, us what we will do is, as opposed to having a different color, we'll just have this as long-sleeved shirt and a long-sleeve trouser. I think allow the schools, because those schools are composed of parents, to make that decision makes sense. I think my last point is something that I think a parent asked, which I think is legitimate, is that uniform in the past has actually been used to extort parents. We got submissions from a parent who says, I went to a school and the amount of money I was spending on uniform was much higher than what I was spending on fees. I can tell you, at least for us in the Working Party, it is something that concerns us. When we do the final report, we will have a robust conversation, ask ourselves, what's the best solution? Because we should not be able to have uniform as a backward way of ensuring that we exhort parents. The other thing is, people have told us, there are countries where you don't have uniform. There are countries where all you do is you have a badge, which you put on your clothes. But you need to balance that against the socioeconomic issues. So I think as a country, this debate will continue to have that, what's the place of uniform to have or not to have. But the one thing we must fix, we must ensure that it is not used as a tool for economic exploitation of parents.
Yeah. Echesa, should the grade 7s have the same uniform as the grade 6?
Trevor, to me, the discussion on uniform is a non-issue. And government is engaging in sideshows instead of addressing substantive matters that will help CBC. If these learners were to join secondary schools as had earlier been proposed by government, were they going to have different uniform from the students who are in secondary schools they are going to join? The answer is in the negative. So why are we running away and saying, now we must have a new set of uniform within the same schools? This is basically one school. The leadership is from one principal, from one head teacher. They're using the same structures. They are feeding on the same meals. They're using the same washrooms. They're using the same field. Why are we creating more disorder? If a junior secondary school has only 2 teachers, do we mean that every week we're going to have an interchange of teachers on duty who are going to take care of this? We better run this junior secondary as a smaller entity of the primary school to avoid this unnecessary commotion. And it is a necessary expense to the parents to tell them to change the uniforms of their learners when, in fact, some of them bought uniforms last year for the transiting students. So the discussion on uniform should not be taking us in circles. We should just declare, if you are going to the same secondary school as a junior secondary, you transit as you were in grade 6. Otherwise, even if you bought the new uniform and the content is old, the classrooms are old, the teachers are the same teachers, other facilities are the same, there's no psychology that we are going to treat in these learners. I think we should run away from this idea of being convinced that CBC transition is about new uniform and retain the old uniforms and save parents from spending what they ought to not to spend.
Okay, but Dr. Manyasa, there's also psychological
Trevor, I went to school when there was still at least the last group of A-level. They were in the same school with us. We wore different sets of uniform. Form 5 and 6 had a different set of uniform. And in fact, when they left, we demanded that Form 3 and 4 wear different sets of uniform. So Form 3 and 4 wore long-sleeved shirts and trousers. Form 1 and 2 wore shorts and short-sleeved shirts. We were in the same school. We were administered by the same principal, taught by the same. So the issue of distinction, I think Prof has put it very well. We must meet these children somewhere in their expectations. Yeah. The expectation was to go to a secondary school. We have told them the circumstances obtaining now are that you will not. We must meet them somewhere.
Okay. Trevor, can I just add 2 very quick things?
Yes.
The first is, HSR said that if these kids went to secondary, will they have a different uniform? Unless I had my English wrongly. The answer is they would.
Yeah.
The uniform they would have in the secondary
would be different.
If they went to any secondary school, it would be, Kabianga, I think, got the highest number of students. If they went to Kabianga, the uniform they would have would be different from Mumia's primary school, number 1. Number 2, my advice to HSA, in the next 1 week, the guidelines should be out. Let's read the guidelines. Let's see what the guidelines say about the governance of junior secondary school. It is not as simple as he says, because essentially this is what is done. This is domiciled in the primary school, but it's not a primary school.
Yeah.
It is a secondary school, it's junior secondary. So in terms of governance, there's need to be much more nuance in terms of how we think about it. And that's why, for me, I think the conversation about uniform, I wish you were saying that it's a small issue, so we don't even need to spend too much time. Not saying let's ignore it.
Okay. Let me take some of the final feedback before we take closing remarks on this. We've run out of time here. But I see Ndimuli Kahi, who's the Kenya Secondary School Heads Association chairperson, saying the learning designs have been released. The current primary schools are not far from each other. Teachers will be teaching at least 2 subjects. There will be need to review the staffing norms and to accommodate those who are not trained teachers to enable some learning areas to be taught. The issues of uniforms is there to manage the student psychological preparation. On the issue of content, KICD will need to review the number of learning areas. That's from Ndimuli Kahi, who's the chairperson, Kenya Secondary School Heads Association. Let's see what you're saying online really quick before we take this closing remarks on this conversation. And D.N. Jalo says, uniform creates equality among the students, so that can't be done away with. A different uniform clearly shows that you have transited to another level, hence making it even easy for the school administration to identify. Okay? Last one here. I personally think that parents and all other key stakeholders need to be a little bit patient with CBC and give it time to nourish and later joyfully enjoy its fruits. All right. Let's take some closing remarks really quick and start with the Chesa in Kakamega. Your closing remarks on this issue. On the 30th now, the students transit.
I think my advice to government that it has to be very patient with Kenyans who are raising issues with CBC, and they need to look at this not as criticism, but as a contribution, as a discourse that will make the system better, if indeed it will ever work.
Okay.
Otherwise, on 30th is going to be a nightmare for our learners.
Okay, Dr. Manyasa, I'm sure you're more optimistic than Chesa.
I am always very optimistic. I think that we have mishandled this process, but we cannot throw away the baby with the bathwater. There are a lot of good things in CBC that we must harness. And so for me, I want to see three things happen. Quickly, a permanent committee that will oversee the remainder of the implementation of CBC in place. If it is not created, establishment of the National Education Board to be the body that will troubleshoot all the challenges emerging along the way. Three, from the working party, I want to see a proper structure called the junior school emerge from the final report, because that is what is envisaged in the basic education curriculum framework, so that we do away with these stories of domiciling. We have primary school, we have junior secondary, and we have senior secondary. And finally, I want to see earnest preparation for senior secondary beginning now, sorting out the crisis that we have already put ourselves into, but preparing to avoid another major crisis at senior secondary level.
Okay.
Thank you.
Prof, final words.
My final words are just two or three. The first one is on the 30th, there will definitely be challenges, definitely, because it's a transition. I think our responsibility, which is my second point, our responsibility as citizens is to ensure that we collectively find solutions for those challenges and find ways of making it better, because we cannot afford to give up on our education system. The last one is, as a member of the Presidential Working Party, I will confirm that we will do our absolute best to try and give recommendations that address some of the challenges that are moving forward, including senior secondary that Manyasa has spoken about. My plea is that all of us as stakeholders must engage in this process moving forward, so that we ensure that a lot of the teething issues that come in are addressed, and that the education system is much more smoother moving forward.
Did you say that the final report is ready, or when will it be ready?
No. Actually, what is going to be ready in the next 1.5 weeks is our second progress report.
Okay.
Because we do a progress report every 2 months.
Yeah.
So that's what we are finishing, and should be ready by the 29th. The final report is due by the 29th of March, and it will be ready.
All right. Thank you so much for making time this evening, and thank you all for all the feedback that you sent through. Professor Collins Udote, member of the Education Reform Task Force, Dr. Emmanuel Manyasa, Executive Director of SAWA Agenda, and Kennedy Echesa, lecturer and advocate of the High Court. Thank you so much for making time this evening. Of course, we'll keep talking about this conversation until the transition is done. And most important, thank you for all your feedback. My name is Trevor Mbija on behalf of the entire team that made this possible. It's good night. We'll see you again next week. All right? Bye for now.